Today we'll be looking at replacing a plunger assembly on your bottoms up beer system. There are a few instances in which this would need to be done. It's pretty drastic. It's sort of a rare instance, but a common diagnosis for why you would need to replace this is that the current plunger rod that you have could be bent or warped somehow due to a manufacturing error, or somehow something got lodged in the valve, or just general maintenance on the valve itself. Something may have been placed in wrong and sort of lined it out of whack. So a way to know that something is off with our plunger assembly would be to, for looking at the top of the plunger head here, see how it's sort of a cone. Oftentimes you'll see beer bubbles coming out of there, or sometimes just straight up shooting out. And if you haven't manually opened the valve, which means you reach underneath and push on the solenoid assembly there to sort of realign it. If you do that and it didn't work, and you've replaced, say, the plunger head gasket here on the top, which is a common leak source, as well as if you haven't replaced the case nut, which houses the plunger assembly, sort of a last-ditch effort here that, well, something's got to be a little wrong with the assembly itself. So we're going to take a look at how to do that and the steps involved and the tools that you'll need. To replace plunger assembly, of course, you'll need your new plunger assembly here. So you see that we've got the main stainless part here is your plunger rod. We have the white flow meter. We've got a black flow guide here and a plunger head gasket. And it should also have been sent a new diaphragm, so we'll be removing the bottom block assembly and need to replace that as well. And all you're going to need for that is a large enough wrench that can fit around the case nut here. So there are grooves on the case nut for that to fit. And you'll need a Phillips screwdriver, a small flathead, or if you have some needle-nose pliers to remove the E-clips on the bottom. That is all you'll need. In addition, it doesn't hurt to have a rag handy to clean up any mess that could happen and to prevent your fingers from getting sliced up by the thin, fine threads on the case nut. First thing we want to do is make sure there's no liquid in the line or any pressure, so when we start taking things apart, we don't make a giant mess. Let's put the valve into purge, and you can put your coupler on there, push it down. So there's nothing in the line, there's no pressure, so we're good to roll. To remove the case nut, take your larger wrench, line it up with flat spots on either side. Just start loosening it. Once you can feel it move around pretty freely, take your rag, just kind of holding those flat spots, kind of see if it's loose. There we go, it's looking pretty good to me. That just popped right off. So if we take a look here, let's see how this moves up and down when you're manually working with it. The flow guide's right up here at the top, moving in. So when you've gotten this far, it doesn't hurt to take a look down inside the valve as well to see if there's anything that could be blocking it or could be misaligning the plunger assembly. If there is something in there, it's easiest to access it from the bottom anyway, so we'll be able to pop that out when we remove the bottom block assembly. All right, looking from the underside of our valve that we're working on here, we want to disconnect power from it. So if this is this is the second valve, so we got this board-to-board jumper, disconnect that. If it's on the main one, you'll see you'll have this screw you'll need to take out the ground, and then just pull out this black plug there. And with that, we also need to disconnect the solenoid here. So is this pair of black wires on the far left, and it just has a little tab. Just pull down on it that way.
To remove the bottom block assembly, so this is our bottom block here, a blue block we also call it. You can see right in the center of this block we've got a spring around a rod. There's our solenoid, and we manually open the valve, just kind of pressing in that way, just so you can see how that's done. To remove all this, I'm going to take off this E-clip right in the center. This little nub is the base of our plunger rod, or whole plunger assembly. I'll remove that. We'll be able to take off this crossbar like so. And then there are 4 screws. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We're gonna unscrew those, and once those are out, we'll be pulling off this whole bottom block. So I just want to start in this back corner here. When you got the screws out, see most of the loose has got one here that's still just kind of housed in the block. Just pull that down, and then our solenoid is all disconnected too, so you just remove that out of the way. So here's the underside and the inside of our valve. And we see the nub here with the base of the plunger rod. We've got another clip and a washer, and this is our diaphragm right here. Once we have this removed, we can easily pull out the old plunger assembly to swap in the new one. So to get that out of the way, much like with our first set of E-clips there, or just one E-clip rather, just take your tiny screw driver and see if pops out. Yep, that'll often come flying out, and you should be able to just take your finger, pull down the diaphragm there, and now see how that's free, and we'll just be able to pull that up through the top. Once everything is removed, just reach underneath and just push up the old assembly there. You don't need that anymore, and take your new assembly and just drop it into place. Go ahead and just give it a few little bobbles here just to make sure there's nothing in the way, make sure everything fits nice and snug. So now we can put our case nut back on. And when we do that, you'll see that there are 3 points on our black flow guide here. And the way to get this case nut seated, start on the back one there, and you're just going to kind of push down over those wings. You might hear it snap into place like that. A good way to tell that everything's working all right is you can still sort of move the plunger assembly like that. And with that, kind of see how this works here. It's just seated right in there. So now you can, by hand if you want to, or you can take your rag, just gonna slowly, so these threads are very fine on the case nut when they're housed in there. You can sometimes cut up your fingers if you're not careful. You can grab the flat points there. I've kind of got the lip right there. It doesn't take much to get it going. Sometimes reverse threading it, help it pop into place. Once it's started, you can grab your wrench and tighten it back down. You kind of got it nice and snug. Just give it just a little bit of torque to make sure it's there. You can see that the assembly still moves pretty freely here. So once we get our bottom block put back on and assembled, we'll be able to see a nice seal with everything together. All right, now we put our new diaphragm on. And do that to see that the diaphragm is sort of a rubber nipple looking thing. And we want the nipple facing up. So it helps to keep one hand over the top here and be pushing up into rod. There we go. And so when it does that, it sort of umbrellas up, and we don't want that to happen. So just make sure it's pushed back down like that. And there is, in the middle of the plunger rod, a groove that sits right in. There's a little better view for what it looks like when the diaphragm is in. So it's kind of pointed up. See the nipples up there in that groove, and right below the diaphragm is the second groove. And we're going to do washer first. And we've got our other clip here. The clips love to go flying, so just take your time with it. Sometimes you can get it with your finger. There we go. Just pop it right in there. And it's moving freely, so we know we're secure there. You can see in the corner of this brass block here, those are our 4 holes for our screws for our blue block, bottom block assembly, whichever you like to call it. And your blue block has those little raised parts there in the back so that they're housed in the brass block. You can easily get those screws fitted in. So be cognizant of the foam that's around. We don't want to get any of that foam stuck inside there. That'll prevent the valve from working the way it's supposed to. I always start in this back corner here. Just be able to sort of do a few passes with your finger. That'll be enough to get that screw in. Then you can just take your Phillips screwdriver give that a couple passes, and then put in the rest of the screws. Once your screws are in, you can take your cross piece here and take your other clip and clip that in place. Make sure it spins freely. It does. Just give this a few pushes, make sure everything flows all right. So now our assembly is all put together. Before checking up top, we need to plug our circuit board back in with this, and we also need to plug in our solenoid. So for the solenoid, again, this is your solenoid here. It's got 2 black wires coming out that black piece at the top. And those go right in the back left. Like that. And you've got your jumper cable, which will go there. So power's on. Now let's
check our seal and we good to roll. All right, back up top. Manually open the valve a few times. Everything moves fine. No restriction, there's nothing inside. And we've got a nice seal happening. Just looking at some of the other ones to compare there. And a good way to always test is put your cup coupler back on. And you would hit the purge button, push down on that, press start, and you'll get liquid to come through. Before you tapping that, it's always a good idea to just put a cup over it and then tap your keg. And if there were any leaks happening, you at least got this to block your way. But you can run through the cycle once you're hooked up. If you don't see any leaks, you would purge, liquid would come out. And then once you've got a little bit of liquid in there, take the coupler off, see if any leaks are happening that way. That is how to replace a plunger rod assembly. And hopefully you don't have any more leaks at this point, and you know just a little bit more about the bottoms up system.